Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Jacob Jans with the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Today, New York Times bestselling author Emily Collin is presenting a lecture on how to write a book that keeps readers up all night. This is part of the monthly lecture series from the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish, where we present lectures on the craft of writing or the business of publishing. Today, Emily is going to share her thoughts on how to keep readers glued to the page, specifically by the artful combination of plot and character. As she says, plot plus character equals story. A couple of days ago, she was telling me about how she had to struggle to learn to put together all of the pieces of the puzzle in terms of making a book engaging and appealing to publishers and readers. It takes more than just good prose to get a book published. And when you're beginning as a writer, you don't know everything that needs to go into a successful book. So today's lecture is going to hopefully reveal some of those puzzle pieces for you and make it a lot easier for you to actually write a story that is really engaging and appealing to both readers and publishers. So let's talk about Emily. Her debut novel, The Memory Thief, was a New York Times bestseller published by Ballantine Books. Her latest book, Sword of the Seven Sins, was published last year. And she just told me it is now a finalist for the Forward Indies Award, with the results being announced in June. She may win that, let's hope. And the sequel to that book will be released this summer. She's also started a small publishing company, written several nonfiction books, and worked as a magazine editor. I'm also very happy to say that she's an instructor for the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Her courses always sell out extremely quickly. She's a fantastic instructor. As one of her students said, I learned more about how to write a YA novel from her class than any other class I've taken, conferences included. My writing improved in leaps and bounds, and I loved every minute of it. That's one student's opinion of hers, one that I agree with completely. I'm very thankful to be presenting today Emily Collin. Welcome, Emily.
Hey, thank you so much, Jacob. That was a lovely introduction. Now I feel like I have a lot to live up to, so I'm going to try hard to do that. But yeah, I'm going to share my screen to the beginning of this presentation really quickly. But one thing that I do want to say, and one reason, as Jacob alluded to, that I really wanted to teach this workshop is I feel like sometimes it's easiest for us to teach what was the hardest for us to naturally do or learn. And for me, the actual craft of writing, the dialogue, the description, the setting, that wasn't nearly as hard for me as figuring out those magic ingredients of story. What is it that not only lets you say, okay, well, this is well written, but actually keeps you wanting to turn the pages, sucks you in and keeps you there. That was something that I truly had to learn. And then once I did learn it, I wish so desperately that someone had explained that to me at the beginning. But I think a little bit, this is sort of like the secret sauce. And people think that it's sort of magic fairy dust that you sprinkle on the page and it comes to life. But I think it can very much be learned. And so I just want to share with you some of the things that I've learned along the way in the hopes that it might help you. Neil Gaiman, who is a writer that I absolutely adore, and maybe some of you do as well, he says, fiction is the lie that tells the truth. And I love that for several reasons. And one reason is that within fiction, we can try on so many lives. We can try on being so many different people. We can imagine ourselves into other people's skin or into other people's circumstances, even if it's so far beyond our own knowledge. And within that, we can begin to empathize with other people in a way that we never could before, and maybe accept truths that would be far harder for us to assimilate if they weren't presented under the guise of story. And so, in my mind, that is one reason why story is so incredibly, incredibly powerful. And the author Lisa Cron, who wrote Wired for Story and Story Genius, she talks about why we are drawn to stories. During the pandemic, a lot of people, myself included, have been drawn to movies, have been drawn to books, especially romantic comedies, romance, things with a happy ending. And it's not simply escapism, it's this idea of imagining yourself into a different reality. And Lisa Cron talks about how long, long ago, telling stories as you sit around the campfire, it isn't simply entertainment, it's a means of staying alive. If you tell the story about the scary glowing eyes around the campfire that turned out the night before to be some kind of mountain lion that ate somebody you cared about, and you make that story compelling enough, with a setup and then the inciting incident of the attack of the mountain lion, and then what happened to that person, whether they survived or whether they didn't, that's going to be a heck of a lot more compelling than somebody got attacked by a mountain lion. Don't let that be you, right? And so this is part of what a story well told can do. It has the power to change lives. And that's what I want to talk about today is how do you tell your stories in such a way that it changes the lives of your readers, and your readers are staying up all night, even though they might have to go to school and work in the morning because they just can't wait to know what happens next. So why do we read, right? Why do we read? That's at the basis of writing a good story, knowing why people are drawn to stories. So sometimes we read, like I talked about with the pandemic, to escape our reality and feel like it's not just us in our little skin suits over here. Sometimes we read because we want to learn. We want to imagine a world beyond our world. Maybe we live in a tiny village and we want to imagine life in a big city. Maybe we live in a place where everybody looks just like us and we want to imagine a world where people are different. Maybe we read because we want to imagine a different way to be. Maybe we live in a restrictive place and we want to imagine a world where people have freedom. Sometimes, particularly with series, we might read because we want to come back to the cozy little small town where the mystery is set, or, the person who always solves the crime and it's our favorite little detective. So that's another reason we read to come home, right? But we also read to travel. We read to learn from others, and we read to imagine change. If you read fantasy novels, sure, they're about whatever world is made up, but they're also about envisioning solving these conflicts in this very interesting way that we can then take and apply to our own lives. And then we read because we love stories, because we're drawn to them. So, why do we pick up a book? Why do you pick up a book online or in the store? Well, first, you might pick up a book because there's a genre that appeals to you. Maybe you love reading romance or mystery or fantasy. Maybe you look at the cover and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful piece of artwork. Or what does that mean? Maybe you pick it up and there's a blurb on there, a little description from an author you love or respect. And you think, if they liked it, I will too. Strong hook. And what I mean when I say hook is something that you never would have necessarily thought of. But for instance, with the Hunger Games, as I always give as an example, teens battling it out to the death in a televised arena. That's a hook, right? What is that? How could that play out? What does that mean? Sometimes we pick up a book because it's a series we want to come back to. Maybe it's a concept we've never thought of or heard of, and it's unfamiliar, and we think, how did they do that? Sometimes it's what we call a trope. So, enemies to lovers is a trope, an example of something familiar that's done again and again. For instance, the underdog hero who doesn't realize they're the chosen one and rises to greatness. We love that trope and we want to see how that plays out. Sometimes we pick up a book because it's an author whose style we love. And sometimes we pick it up because something resonates with our personal experience. So when someone goes to read your story, published or unpublished, some of these things may not be relevant yet if it's not published, but some of these things, the original concept, the trope, the personal experience, the hook, all of that is stuff that you can bring to the page from the very, very beginning. And then once you've started reading, why do you keep going? And all of these things, which you can think of when they apply to your own reading habits, you can then apply to your own writing. The first and most important thing I believe, is that we read to find out what's going to happen because of how invested we've become in characters, characters that we identify with or empathize with or are angry with, but we care deeply about them. We need to know what's going to happen to them. Without that, why would you keep going? So that's a very emotional and visceral reason that we read. And then there's some more intellectual reasons. Maybe this author is amazing and has built these fantastic plot twists. We want to unravel this plot twist. We want to solve this mystery. Maybe we read because we love tension and surprises, or maybe the character at the beginning of the book is damaged, is someone who is hurt or broken in some way, and we want to find out, do they overcome that? Maybe this character has a very clear goal. They want to pull off a bank heist. They want to marry the person of their dreams. They want to earn a degree. They want to fly to outer space, and they want to be the first person in their family to graduate from college. Do they make that happen? We want to know. If you're reading a romance, maybe we read in search of happy endings. Maybe we read because, darn it, we want to find out how this villain, this antagonist is vanquished. We've been waiting this whole time to see if Harry beats Voldemort. What happens, you know? And sometimes, again, back to the visceral, back to the emotional tug, which I think is beneath all of this. Does a story make us laugh? Does a story make us cry? And a lot of the time, sometimes that's about banter, sometimes that's about circumstance, but I think it really all comes back to, do we care about the characters in your story that you're writing? So this is what I think of as the secret sauce. Then I'll talk a little bit about how to mix it up, right? Plot plus character equals story. What do I mean by that? So by itself, without character, what is plot? A happens, B happens, C, D, E, F, G happens. These things happen. They might be the most dramatic things in the world. Person falls off a cliff, then person survives, then person chases down this woman, then person jumps out of a plane. Without caring about who those characters are and knowing why those things that are happening matter to the people in the story, it's not going to matter. Plot is empty. Plot is a skeleton with no flesh on it. As Victoria Schwab, the author, would say, just kind of hang in there, like one of those skeletons that you used to see in the corner at Biolab, just gathering dust, right? But then without plot, what happens to characters? If you don't have A happens, B happens, C, D, E, your characters could be the nicest people in the world, just wandering around, bantering, shopping, talking to each other, taking the kids to school. Nothing's happening. So the two of them, they drive each other. So characters are this engine that's driving your plot. What is motivating your characters? What choices do they make? How does it go wrong for them? What caused them to make these choices? What do they want to happen? What do they fear? What do they have to overcome? All of these things work in tandem, in lockstep with your plot together to equal that story that's going to keep readers turning the pages. Okay, so I'm a big believer that we need to know what the rules are so we can break them or stay with them, one of the two, but you got to know what they are. So whether you're a plotter or a pantser, meaning that you just fly by the seat of your pants as you figure out a story, whether you're a plantser, which is kind of in the middle, maybe you plot stuff out to some extent and then you fly by the seat of your pants for the rest of it. I think it's important to know how stuff works before you say it's not for you, right? So typically, we can think of a book as having 3 acts, right? If you write romance, and you took my romance class, you might hear me talk about Gwen Hayes' Romancing the Beat, and she talks about romances having 4 acts. But let's just go with non-romance for now, general fiction. So Act 1 is the first 25% of the book. That's the part of the book where you meet the characters, they're going along fine, something happens, it catapults them into change, it catapults them into a different world. They need to decide what to do about it, and that in turn catapults them into Act 2. Act 2 is most of your book. It's 50%. Sometimes people call that the saggy middle, and that's because it's the longest part of your book, and so that's where there's the most potential for lag. Save the Cat writes a novel by Jessica Brody, which is based on Blake Snyder's screenwriting Bible, Save the Cat. They talk about that being the fun and games section, and it's not all fun and games. Sometimes things go horribly wrong for your characters. In the Hunger Games, that's where Katniss Everdeen is battling it out in the arena. Not going so well for her, but for the reader, fun and games. This is also what's sometimes called the promise of the premise. This is where whatever that hook was that you delivered, that you promised in your blurb, in your back cover copy, in your mind, when you imagine what this book was going to be about, it's coming to life on the page. And then Act 3 is 25%. The climax of the story has happened and we're getting the wrap up, right? There's a lot of books that delve really deeply into plot structure, and everyone has a different preference for what works for them. One of my personal favorites, as I mentioned, is Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And what you see behind me, this cork board that you can see behind my head, that's my plotting board, and it's divided into sections. I would never have been able to divide it that neatly, so I had to get some help. But those index cards, each of them represents a particular plot point that's in the structure of Save the Cat Writes a Novel. And one reason why I use that is, like I said before, some people have a very instinctive grasp of plot, but maybe they struggle more with dialogue or setting or writing romance scenes or whatever. I'm better at those things instinctively. I had to teach myself plot. So I impose a structure, and then I can always deviate from that structure, but I needed to learn what it was. And so as readers, we look for familiar patterns in story, in movies too, right? So every good book, every good movie has a catalyst, an inciting incident. And that is your characters going along, everything's cool and fine. Something happens and it changes that character's life forever. So if you think about, Tom Hanks and his FedEx plane crashing, and all of a sudden he's marooned on the island with Wilson. You see his life in the beginning, just going along, working for FedEx. I think it was FedEx. All of a sudden the plane goes down and he's literally in a different world, trapped on this island. Katniss Everdeen, you see her in a situation where you see what, District 12 is like. Her life is going along. All of a sudden, Prim gets picked to be a tribute, and then her life changes. Literally, her world changes. She's catapulted into the arena. The same with the Outlander series. If you're a fan of that, you see Claire's life and setup. Then at the Stones, she gets sucked through literally another world. There she is back in time in the 1700s in Scotland. So these are some extreme examples. Of course, you may write quieter fiction where it's not quite so dramatic, but I like to choose extreme examples for lectures like this or presentations like this so that you can really clearly see this illustrated. So we're looking for that in a story. There's also the all is lost and dark nights of the soul moments. So those are moments where your character's been working for something so hard this entire novel and everything went wrong. It's never going to be okay. They've lost the person they love. They've lost their job. They've lost the opportunity. Whatever it is has been snatched from them. And then they believe all is lost and they're in this dark night of the soul where they're like, what am I going to do? And out of that, of course, comes the Phoenix and their true growth as a character, the lesson they're meant to learn. So one thing I'd say is familiarize yourself with story structure. I suggest Save the Cat Writes a Novel, but there's tons of other ones that you can pursue on your own. And then superimpose that structure on movies or books that you already know really well and that you love, and see how it plays out. Literally write it down. Look for where's that catalyst where everything changes? Where is that dark night of the soul? Where is the moment when all is lost? And then think about how you might transpose that into either the story you've already written, the story you're in the middle of writing, or the story that you're about to write. If you have a really great handle on plot structure already, this might not be necessary for you. But if you feel like sometimes your story meanders and you're stuck in the middle and you're 2/3 through or you're 150 pages in and you're like, I just don't know what happens next. I'm like wandering in the woods and I've lost the breadcrumbs. What do? I have found this to be a really good road home. Okay, so Lisa Cron, Wired for Story, and Wired for Story and Story Genius are two other books that I thoroughly recommend. She says this, I'm just going to read it, even though I hate when people read from PowerPoints because I think that this is a really important quote. The events by themselves mean nothing. It's what those events mean to someone that has us compulsively turning pages. So this is a revisiting of what I spoke of in the beginning. The events by themselves are the plot. What those events mean to someone, it's how the plot affects your characters, right? And so, okay, if it's just a woman walked through some stones and wound up in 1700 Scotland, we don't care. But we care in Outlander because we've already met Claire. We know how stressful it was for her to be a nurse in World War II. We know all the fraught nature of her relationship with her husband. We know now they're reunited and it's so difficult and they're trying to find themselves and what's happening. And then we already care about her so deeply. She goes through the stones and now she's in this tumultuous society and we're invested in her as a person. So we want to know what happened. So keep that in mind, that that plot and that character, they're braided together. And sometimes when I have students in my classes who talk about feeling frustrated with writing synopses, I tell them as they write the synopses to think about your plot points, but think about how each of those plot points changes your character from point A to point B. This happens. What happens to your character as a result? What do they do? How does that make the next thing happen? How does the next thing that happens then affect your character, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And honestly, sometimes I write my synopses before I write my stories so I can see how all of that plays out. Okay. So sometimes when I'm writing and things aren't going well, I feel like this baby with the hat on, because it's just not working no matter what I do. And it's supposed to be really fun and great. And it just isn't, like the world's worst birthday party, right? And so I truly believe that you could be the most brilliant writer in the world, gorgeous lyrical writing. You string syllables together like pearls, and it's the most gorgeous thing anyone's ever seen. But if we don't care about your characters, then no matter how beautifully you describe your setting or what a person is wearing or the food or the scent or the smells, it's not going to matter to us. So you must make your readers care. How do you do that? Okay, what makes us care? So starting from the very beginning, if you have a character who's in a vulnerable position, who we already know is the underdog, we're going to care for that person because we're going to root for them. We want them to triumph. We want them to be brave enough to speak in front of class, or to get out from that cupboard underneath the stairs, or to triumph against President Snow, or to win the war, whatever it is. If we have a kind character, people empathize with kind characters. They want to be on the side of the nice, kind person who's generous and doing good things. If a character's funny from the beginning, we'll forgive a lot if someone's funny. We like to laugh, right? Make your characters funny if that's something that suits you well. We're also drawn to a character who's going to make the right choice in a really morally ambiguous or difficult situation. We have respect for that character. So that might not be quite as emotional as the underdog, right? But we're like, okay, I like you. I'm invested in you. You didn't have to stand up to the bully, but you did. Okay. In Save the Cat, the reason it's called Save the Cat, right, is after the idea in screenwriting that you can have the most disagreeable character in the world. And if that's going to be your protagonist, you need to make viewers like or readers like that person. Have them save a kitten stuck in a drain. Everybody loves someone who saves a kitten stuck in a drain. Like, how bad can this person be? Maybe they've showed us that they're rude and they're this and they're that so far, but on the way home from being rude, this and that, they stop to save the kitten stuck in the drain. We like them. A character who wants or needs something, right away, we're like, okay, we want to help you get that thing. We're on your side. And then, of course, a character who stands up to a clear antagonist. We're going to right away see that conflict and say, okay, I'm rooting for you. Okay, so every great story, and this is going to sound reductive, but bear with me because I think this is helpful. Every great story can really be reduced to a what if question. And sometimes when I'm struggling to find the heart of a new story and I'm frustrated and I'm like, does this have legs? Is this going to work? I think about, can I reduce my story to a what if question? What is the essential question that I'm asking here? So lest I sound too abstract, let me specify. So Harry Potter, which most people know, right? What if a neglected orphan boy suddenly discovered he was a wizard? That is Harry Potter, right? What if a World War II army nurse found herself sucked back to 1700 Scotland? That is the question, the what if question at the center of Outlander. What if the letters that a girl wrote in secret to her old crushes were mailed to those crushes and she didn't know and she didn't say it was okay? That's Jenny Han's To All the Boys I'd Loved Before. There's two more examples here. You can see them. I won't read all of them, but you get the idea, of course, how that what if question plays out. You could give 5 authors the same what if question and you would get 5 different stories. But boiling something down to a what if question is not eliminating the possibilities. It's giving you a laser focus so you know what possibilities you're exploring, right? So sometimes I feel like people think, okay, people say things like this to me in writing classes, and I want to be free when I write. I work all day, and I don't want to come home to my writing, and that's the moment that I can be free. And now I'm having to boil everything down to one line. For me, I have found this freeing, because otherwise I feel like sometimes I waste time trying to figure out what's the heart of my story. What is the question I'm asking that readers are going to spend 300 pages, 400 pages desperate to know the answer to, that's going to keep them up all night reading? If you don't know what that what if question is, your reader sure as heck isn't going to. Don't make them work for it. Know it from the beginning. Okay. So this is sort of the pre-writing work that I do. And again, like sometimes I'm just so eager to jump in and write that I will sit down and jot a scene that came to me on a walk or in a shower, in a conversation, in a dream. But that doesn't mean that I'm ready to go ahead and write the whole book. It might mean that I have this gem of a moment, this gem of a line, this gem of a vision of my two characters fighting or loving or whatever it is. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to write the whole thing. It just means I wrote that bit down so I didn't lose it. So we talked about the what if question. And again, how you answer that question is determined by your individual plot, but your plot is informed by your characters' goals, their motivations, their obstacles, wants, and needs, right? So without that, the plot, again, just a skeleton, like V.E. Schwab says. So the other thing that I think is key to making a story come alive on the page is for you, the author, before you even start, and this can change in the middle, stories are fluid, to know the main point you want that story to make, right? So that main point is sometimes called the theme, but I feel like calling something a theme sounds a little bit academic to me. It sounds a little bit distant. So I don't like to do that. We'll call it the point. And the idea is, what is the point that you're trying to make? Are you trying to make the point that love conquers all? That's Harry Potter. That it's important to stand up for what you believe in, even though you might face dire consequences as a result? That's in The Hate You Give. Is it that true love stands the test of time no matter what life throws at you? That's Outlander. What's your point? What do you want readers to walk away from this story understanding or believing? What are you trying to persuade them is the truth, right? And so that is going to walk in lockstep with your what if question. Um, so, Outlander, what if a World War II nurse gets sucked back in time to 1700s Scotland, where we learn that true love stands the test of time, no matter the obstacles, blah, blah, blah. So you see how they move together. And in order, once you know that point, once you know what it is, everything that happens in your story either supports it or contradicts it, and your main character needs to work that to find out that it's the truth. They may not know that in the beginning. They may believe something totally different. Maybe that's the lesson they have to learn over the course of the story. Okay, so getting to know your characters. This is so important. We've talked somewhat about plot. Now I want to talk about character. If you've worked with me before, you'll know this is like my little song that I sing. But I think it's so important. So I'm going to use the Hunger Games as an example because I really, truly, I often do this, but I think it's one of the clearest and best examples of this that I can do that everyone is pretty familiar with from books or movies. All right. What do your main characters want? Katniss Everdeen, main character in the Hunger Games, she wants to survive the Hunger Games and come back to her sister. All right, that's her goal. We know from the very beginning, even from before she gets picked or volunteers as tribute, we know that if she gets picked, she's going to want desperately to come home, right? Okay, why does she want this? All right, we need to know your character's motivation. In Katniss's case, this is very clear. If she does not succeed in beating the other tributes and coming home, A, she'll be dead, and B, she will have failed to protect her sister. And that is so vital to her. She loves her sister maybe even more than herself. Okay, now you need to know for your character, what is in the way? What's the obstacle? And this needs to be something big, right? Because your character is trying this whole time desperately to achieve their goal. And if there's something in the way, it better be a big thing or it's not going to be able to carry your entire story. Okay, Katniss Everdeen, what's her obstacle? The other tributes in the arena, President Snow, an entire, dictatorship. These are pretty big obstacles. All right, now the stakes. Your stakes can't be muddy. We need to understand that from the beginning, and they need to increase incrementally as your story goes on. What will happen if your character doesn't get what they want? And this is part of what your readership is reading for. This is a big thing that your readership is reading for. Your character wants this thing. Are they going to get it or not? Turning the pages, turning the pages, turning the pages. This is where plot twists come in, ratcheting up the tension comes in, understanding who your character is and why this thing that they want matters so much to them. That's all in this. What happens if Katniss doesn't get what she wants? She dies. Can't get much higher stakes than that, right? And then, this is also really important. What does your character really need? Not what they want, not what they think they should have, and how will they change over the course of the story? And this is intimately connected to their flaw. So, Katniss Everdeen, at the beginning, she is very selfish. She believes she needs to be an island unto herself to survive. She won't let anybody in, not even Peeta, who's so kind to her, not Gale, not anybody, right? What she realizes over the course of the story is that what she wants is to survive and come home to Prim. What she needs is to overcome that flaw of not letting anybody into her heart, because only when she joins forces with other people in a similar circumstance can she truly work not only to survive herself, but to overthrow the entire dictatorship and flawed system that will lead the people who have been oppressed to thrive. And that is a hard thing to learn. She learns it a little bit more in each book in the series. She learns it completely by the end. And if you are just writing a single book, your character learns whatever that lesson is, and they have to confront their major flaw to learn it over the course of the story. So, you know what question your novel is trying to answer. You know what your point is. Figure out your goal. When you sit down to write, you can't have this be muddy. What does your character want more than anything else? What are they out to get at the beginning of your story? You need to know so we can know as readers, so we can root for them to get it. We want to be rooting for your character. And whatever this is, it's got to be big, and we need to understand why they want it. If someone wants to open up a new business on Main Street and this is the whole goal of their novel, we need to understand that maybe it's because their dad always told them they're terrible with money, they'll never succeed. And this is their big, you know what, to their dad, saying, dad, I can do this. I may not be married. I'm not going to take your money. I can stand on my own 2 feet. I'm going to fulfill this dream. So this whole time, we are rooting for that character. They're the underdog. The dad isn't maybe the antagonist, or maybe it's somebody else. But if they do not achieve this dream, we're going to be disappointed for them. We desperately want them to succeed. And we understand why it matters. Okay, so whatever your character wants at the very beginning of this novel, that needs to continue throughout the story. It can shift and change a little bit, but it needs to drive the story. And it's really great if whatever they want is also what the antagonist wants. So the two of them are competing for the same goal, and who's going to get it first, right? So let's take a movie. Let's take You've Got Mail. It's a movie from a long time ago. We got Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks. They are competing to operate a local bookshop, right? She owns this little bookstore that I think her mother owned before her. He's opening Fox Books, Fox, he says, and it's this Goliath of a bookstore. It's a corporate bookstore. They both want to control the local book market. From the very beginning of the story, their goals are clear. They want the same thing, but then they're in opposition. Okay, so why does your character want what they want? If Meg Ryan wants to have this bookstore open so badly, it's one thing if she just has always kind of wanted to operate a bookstore because she likes books and she needs a job, and here she is. It's something else if this was her mom's dream, and maybe she lost her mom young and she wants desperately to keep her mom's legacy alive. All of a sudden there's sentimental value attached to that bookstore, right? So now we care even more because it's not just about a bunch of paper and shelves and whatever. It's about her mom's memory. We need to care about your characters from the very start. Everybody loves an underdog. Everyone can relate to losing someone. Everyone can relate to being up against a more powerful entity. Boom. From the very beginning, there is our connection. We care, so we're going to keep reading or watching to see what happens. Okay, this is the obstacle. Why can't your characters have what they want? I think that's a buffalo. What is the gigantic animal, the gigantic bovine animal, standing in the middle of the road so you can't get by, right? So if your characters could have what they wanted right away, there would be no story. Your conflict is going to drive your story. So make your characters uncomfortable, make them work for it, make them have difficulty getting what they want. There can be little obstacles along the way, but there should be a really big one that they need to figure out how to get around. In the Hunger Games, how is Katniss going to survive all of these other folks in the arena, many of whom are better trained than she is? How is she going to combat President Snow's wiles? How is she going to beat a whole system when she's just one girl? It's a pretty darn big obstacle, right? Okay. What is your character's major flaw? So the external obstacle, like the buffalo or whatever that was in the middle of the road, that's preventing them from getting what they want. But also, inside is something preventing them from getting what they need, their internal flaw, their internal obstacle. This has to be something big. Maybe they can't ever get close to anyone because their mother abandoned them when they were very small. Maybe they deal with everything with anger because that's the only example they've ever been shown. Maybe they'll never get into a relationship because their parents got divorced and they vowed they would never be in that situation. Whatever it is, whatever this flaw is, whether they can't trust, whether they won't share, whether they have to do everything on their own, this needs to be interfering with their lives in a way that you can see as the reader, but they are unwilling to confront. And only when they overcome this flaw can they get what they truly need instead of just what they want. That's your character arc over the course of the story. That's how your character learns the important, crucial lesson that they need to know to become the best person that they can be. And there we are as readers turning those pages. Are they going to overcome this flaw? Will they finally trust? Will they open this business with this person? Will they finally be brave enough to present in front of the class? Will they finally be kind enough to this person to actually extend a hand and help her instead of continuing to be cruel because they didn't want to be grouped with her? Whatever it is, will they overcome this? We want your character to do that. That will keep us turning the pages to find out. And then what will happen if your character doesn't get what they want? Here you see this child in the wreckage, right, of what used to be a home. These are terrible stakes. Maybe it was a bombing, maybe it was a fire. I don't know what happened there, but we can imagine, right? Something happened and the stakes resulted in this. So these consequences have to be dire. Now, they can be dire in like a global way, like if Harry Potter doesn't defeat Voldemort, the world will end. But they can also be personal. Not all books play out on this huge of a scale, like Outlander or The Hunger Games or Harry Potter. They can be very personal. Maybe your character is desperate to go to college and become a filmmaker. Maybe that was her father's dream for her, and her father's passed away, and she desperately wants to fulfill his legacy, and they struggle financially without it. And if she doesn't get the scholarship based on the short film, she's not going to be able to go to college, and she's going to let her dad down in her mind, right? That's personal. And we need to understand why your character has gotten to this point, because without knowing your character, so what? You get into film school, you don't. So what? You make a film or you don't. But if we know why this matters so much to your character, then we're going to be drawn in. Whatever your character's flaw is, it needs to be closely connected to their goal and their stakes. So maybe this girl is hesitant to rely on anybody else, but to make this a successful short film, she has to do just that. Will she or won't she, right? Whatever your character's goal is, they have the opportunity to confront that flaw over and over again as the stakes get higher and higher, and ultimately, after several attempts, defeat it. That's the lesson they learn. Oh, so important to say, don't forget your antagonist. They should be as fully developed as your protagonist. No mustache twirling cartoon character villain. Remember, your antagonist in his or her or their mind, they believe they're the hero. They believe they're doing the right thing. So make this person fully fleshed out. Do that character questionnaire for your antagonist. Make sure that we know why they're doing this so they have clear motivations. And don't forget the ally or the helper character, right? So what's an ally? What's a helper character? They're sometimes called either one. This is a person early on who presents the path that your main character should be on, but they choose not to take. In The Hunger Games, this is Peeta saying to Katniss some version of, I just wish there was a way for me to die as myself, a way for them to not own me in the end. Katniss laughs him off, like, oh, come on, that's not possible. We're all pawns in their game. You're just an idealistic fool. that is actually the lesson that she needs to learn by the end, how to change the rules so that they're playing her game instead, right? So initially, your main character vehemently denies the importance of this lesson, but ultimately they'll come around. And in that coming around, that's their character arc. And again, we as the reader will see this, root for this, keep turning the pages to see if it happens. Okay, so just as a made up version of a connection between your characters, their goals, their obstacles, their stakes, their flaws, their lesson. Let's say that there's a woman who's got a dream of being the very first person to ever walk on Mars. That's her goal. All right, here's her flaw. She's fiercely independent. She will not depend on anybody else. She thinks they'll only mess up. She's got to do it herself alone. Because of this flaw, on this mission to Mars, where everyone is so dependent on everybody else, she doesn't trust her fellow officers. Everything goes wrong again and again and again, with higher and higher stakes because they're in this spaceship going to Mars, right? Finally, they're about to land on Mars and disaster ensues. She loses control. She has to trust her co-pilot to land. But wait, only I can do this. I'm the only one. If I cede control to him or her or them, everything might go wrong. What do I do? Here you've got the stakes, life or death, and then you've got the flaw, which is like, I can't trust anyone. And you've got the reader, will they live? Will they die? Okay, she trusts their judgment. The mission is saved. It was teamwork. And then her and her co-pilot together are the first two people to set foot on Mars, right? That is how all of that can come together. Okay, so a brief intermission to note that as we're doing this character questionnaire, you're actually really putting together the puzzle pieces of your plot. Once your characters have certain goals, motivations, obstacles, wants, and needs, within that what if question that you're asking and this theme, there's a limited number of ways that make sense. And within that, an even more limited number of ways that are going to excite you for that story to go. So Victoria Schwab, she calls the bones of your story the story corpse. Sounds a little gruesome, but bear with me. She gave a wonderful free masterclass for Y'all Write, and it was for young adult fiction, but this could be applied to anybody. It's totally free. There's the link. In this, plot equals bones, character equals muscle, prose equals flesh when you put a story together. If you're a visual person, which I am, this is a highly visual way of considering what story structure looks like. And so the important lesson here is to think about the layers of your story, like the layers of the human body, to not have to worry about layering the skin on perfectly, putting on the mascara, curling your hair, getting the right pair of glasses, wearing the right tie, until you've got that bones and muscle straight. Don't overwhelm yourself. Okay, character informs plot, informs character. What do I mean by that? When you know your characters well, they're only going to make certain choices, and those choices are going to go along with their flaws and their motivation, what you know about their history and their goals. They make those choices because of these things that drives the plot, that informs the people your characters become. If you know your point, you know your what if question, you know those goals, wants, and needs, your plot is going to flow really naturally in service to that point or theme. As Lisa Cron said, the story creates beautiful writing, not the other way around. Don't worry about having beautiful writing if you don't have the story to support it. So I'm not much for math, but this is an equation I love. Good writing plus story, of course, is what we aspire to. We want great writing. We want strong plot. We want strong characters. But a strong story where we care about the characters and the plot is working in lockstep with those characters, we are going to forgive misspellings. Gosh forbid. We're going to forgive someone who maybe uses a turn of phrase repetitively. We're going to forgive some things that maybe we would not accept otherwise because we are so desperate to find out what's going to happen to these characters. If the plot is compelling and we care about your characters deeply, we're going to accept some errors in poor writing. And a great example of that is the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, which no one would argue is well written, but no one would also argue wasn't a bestseller. That sat at the New York Times bestseller list for a really long time because people wanted to know what happened to Christian and Anna, not because the writing was so beautiful, because people cared about the characters, were invested in the story, and of course, the erotic romance was a piece of that as well. But it is a crystal clear example of how we read for plot, and we read for character. We read for story. Okay, so to wrap this up, I just want to make sure that I get across there's no one way to write. So be kind to yourself. Some people write quickly and others slowly. So whatever your process is, honor that. No two books are the same. Before you sit down to write, take the time, take a breath to figure out what you need to. If something isn't working, stick with it or put it aside, come at it from another angle. But remember that writing and publishing and revising, it is a marathon effort, not a sprint. And it's so hard not to compare yourself to other people, but your journey is yours alone. And if you feel that you often start and then get stuck, or start and don't finish, I truly recommend figuring out the heart of your story, the way we talked about here, before you worry about getting words on the page. No one gets this right the first time. Everybody revises. Sometimes people tear apart. With my first book, The Memory Thief, I tore apart the first 100 pages very far into the querying process. And it was that allowed me to find an agent. So keep in mind that you may have to do that. You may have to revise for a while, but if you do this hard work in the beginning, it is going to save you so much heartache at the end. And also, when you get stuck, if you get stuck, figure out, what do you love about this particular story? Why are you telling this story now? Stay true to that vision, that theme, that what if question, and circle back to it at times that you're stuck. You might have to re-interview your characters to see if you're truly being true to their goals, wants, and needs. Maybe you thought you knew what they wanted, but the story proved you wrong. These are, I won't spend a lot of time in this because I know Jacob's going to send this out as a link, but these are some resources that I use when writing. My website is on the bottom, and you can email me through my website, info@emilycollin.com. You can, if you want, sign up for my newsletter there, The Cozy Corner, where I share book recs and glimpses into my behind the scenes writing life and my nutty process and all kinds of fun stuff, and sometimes let you know when I have a book coming out. And here are some of my books. You can see Unbound was a short story collection, as was Wicked South. My 2 adult books are on the bottom, and in the beginning is the first book in my YA series, The Seven Sins. And so that's it. That's the end. That is my my suggestions for how to write a book that will keep readers staying up all night, turning the pages into the end. So I am going to, if I can make this work, stop my screen share. And here we go.
Thank you so much, Emily. I feel like my head is just jammed full of ideas. Yeah, and that was wonderful. So many interesting and thoughtful ideas about how to really write a compelling novel. You made me think of a book that I read years ago that kept me up all night long when I was already completely exhausted, which is Seven Eves by Neil Stevenson. And part of what I think I realized part of why that book kept me up so much was I did like the main characters, but what really hooked me was I started to dislike the antagonist like as strongly as I liked the characters, and I really wanted to see like the antagonist defeated, and that just like it kept me reading. And yeah, your lecture really brought that memory back to me. Yeah, so that was thank you so much. So there's so many pieces to this. Like you talked about the catalyst event, and like a character you care about, having a good plot structure, a strong hook, that what if question. When you're starting this process, what do you think is like the first thing to focus on?
The very first thing I would focus on is really that what if question. What is the big question that your novel is trying to answer? Really boiling it down to that. What's that big question? You know, what if this thing transpired? What if what if I was sucked back in time to 1700 Scotland? What if, right? What's that what if question? Can you take this
Yeah.
idea in your head and form it into a what if question, right? And so that's usually the very first thing I do. And the second thing that I do is try to think of who the main characters are going to be, including the antagonist. And I really try to figure out that their goals, their wants, their obstacles, and their needs.
Mhm.
That's the second thing that I do.
Yeah.
And I do that because for me, that helps me figure out the plot. If I know what my main character's goal is, then I know this thing is something that's going to play a huge role in the book. And if I know what my main character's flaw is, then I know what they have to overcome, that wherever they're going to wind up is the opposite of their flaw. So
Yeah.
I do that always first, and it takes me a while. Sometimes I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I thought I knew, but his goal is muddy, or oh, the stakes are too. That's always my problem. The stakes are too low. The stakes are too
Yeah.
low. So I spend a fair amount of time tinkering with that, and I will tell you that, like, for folks that I've worked with who have written manuscripts and are frustrated, and they come to me in an editorial capacity because I work, as a freelance editor too. So they'll
Yeah.
come to me and say, this just isn't working and I don't know why. And I'm getting feedback that it just isn't working, but I don't know why. I will always have them do that character questionnaire. And invariably, the problem is in there and they figure it out themselves. Well, I thought he wanted this, but that's not how the story plays out. I don't really know what his flaw is. I thought it was that, but that's not related to the stakes. Almost invariably, when you kind of pop the hood of the story and you look
Mhm.
under it like that and you kind of try to retcon it, you'll find the
Yeah.
answer in there. And that's why I do it first. And I wish someone had told me that when I started writing, because it would have saved me a heck of a lot of pain and trouble.
Yeah. So when you're coming up with these ideas, how do you evaluate them? Like, at what point do you decide that's the idea to like run with the book?
I mean, I think part of it is it has to be something you're excited about. You're going to
Yeah.
be these characters for months, if not years, right? And so it has to be something that you as a writer are passionate about, first of all. If you're not excited about it or passionate about it, then forget it. Like, why would you do
Yeah.
that to yourself? But within like the Venn diagram of ideas I had and ideas that I'm passionate about,
Yeah.
like little thing, I mean, for me, a lot of it is it all gelling together? Like, okay, I said this was her goal. Now this is her flaw. But if that's her flaw, then her lesson has to be overcoming that. So that's what she really needs. Is that where I wanted this story to go? And how is that
Mhm.
going to work with the antagonist? It's really like, it's as if you think you have the puzzle pieces, and sometimes you end up realizing that you got the puzzle pieces to two different puzzles. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
that doesn't gel. So for me, it's a lot of trial and error. I'm like, okay, oh, that's not good enough. Oh, nobody cares. This is not compelling
Yeah.
enough. And when I'm finally like, yes, that makes sense in my head. That would really matter. Someone would really do that. If that happened to me, I would be heartbroken, or I would be
Yeah.
thrilled, or I'd be like, is
Yeah.
it following naturally? Is it exciting? And does it evoke an emotional response?
Yeah. And I think you're right. I mean, if you really want to get a book published traditionally, you're going to be spending years on the book. So if you're going to like need to be excited initially, especially if you're going to be spending 2 years answering that what if question.
I will even say this. Let's say that you are rapid releasing as an indie author. I
Yeah.
think it's even more important that you have a handle on this,
Mhm.
because indie publishers, or indie authors, I should say, sometimes called self-published authors, you have the ability, you've got more control over your work. That
Yeah.
means that you can bring books out more quickly. In fact, it often means that you have to bring books out more quickly if you are
Yeah.
dependent on that income. It does not mean that you should then put shoddy books out into the market. It means that you need to put out the best work that you can put out, and quickly. To do that, you really need to get a handle on these rudiments. You can't afford to spend a year mucking about with figuring it out and working through. That's unfortunately not how making a living from being an indie author works. You have to have
Mhm.
a solid handle on story structure and a solid handle on this sort of character building process, so that when you have an idea, you can superimpose this matrix and then do whatever you need to do to bring it out quickly. So I think it's
Yeah.
important for both cases.
Yeah. So if you are producing more quickly, the better you understand the elements of a good story, like the higher quality it will be.
And the faster
Yeah.
you'll be able to do it,
Yeah.
and the less the less you'll have to go back and be like, oh, that doesn't work at all, because you're figuring out whether or not it works before you even start.
It also seems to me that like the point you brought up about having a central point to a book is super important, like because that ultimately becomes the reason why people really value books in the long term, because of like what it convinced them of in terms of like how life is meaningful, how it changes someone's perspective. Like that's the central point in a book. And like that's what, do you think that's what makes a book really stick with people in the long term?
I think many things make a book a book stick with people. I
Yeah.
think one of them is exactly what you said. I think another one can be maybe somebody who didn't typically see themselves on the page, and all of a sudden someone who looks like them or sounds like them or lives in a place where they live or has a disability they have is reflected
Yeah.
on the page, not as a victim but as a hero. Someone from a particular cultural group not typically represented, that's going to stay with you because it says, I am worthy of being seen, I am worthy of being visible, I am worthy of
Yeah.
representation. That can change the world, that can change a child, right? I also
Absolutely.
think that, I think that's really key. I also think that, for me, I love to read all kinds of stuff, but I love to read fantasy. I love to read romance. So sometimes books stay with me because of the amazing, incredible world building that a
Oh
fantasy
yeah.
author did. Sometimes in romance, it is like this small town that this, writer has constructed, and how comfortable it is to meet the bookstore owner again and the grumpy yoga teacher. And oh my gosh, why is she grumpy? Because yoga teachers should be home, and whatever it is, like falling back into that world where everything is always going to be okay, and where the characters have gone on for 10 books. Or if you take the Virgin River series, which is like a Netflix series now, I think there's 21 books or something like that in that series.
Wow.
When you go back to Virgin River, you always know what you're going to get. So I think that there's
Yeah.
an element of that too. But I do think that that what if question and that point, that
Yeah.
theme, can be so important, because whether your theme is it's important to be resilient and stand up for what's right no matter what happens, or whether your theme is every romance novel theme ever, love conquers all, like those themes are important and they stay with you. And I think people internalize those, particularly if they identify with the characters, and it can bolster them up and stay with them on an emotional level.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the lecture today. I thoroughly enjoyed it. If anyone has any questions for me or for Authors Publish, you can email support@authorspublish.com. You can look up our course catalog if you search for the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. We regularly come out with courses. And yeah, thank you, everyone. We're going to be continuing to do a monthly lecture series. So if you signed up for this, you'll be notified of future lectures and also workshops available. And Emily, is there any last thing you would like to say?
No, just thanks so much to everybody for coming, and don't stop telling your stories.
Yeah, and also everybody, be sure to check out Emily on her website. Is it emilycollin.com?
Oh yeah, it's Emily Collins, COLIN.com.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day.
All right, thank you, everyone.